welcome all of you to our webinar, Balkan Challenges in the 21st Century, from our John Monnet module, Think in Europe, whose center in Eastern Europe. And this webinar would be moderated by Kaloyan Stanev, who's a PhD in history, teacher of Pompeu Fabra University on Barcelona, and in University ORT Uruguay. So he would introduce you all the panel, and I let him show the Zoom to him. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Virginia, and thank you for everyone who is attending. I will quickly present a little bit the region, and then I will present the participants, and we will start with the webinar. Actually, as you all know, the Balkans are one of the most traveled regions in Europe, and unfortunately, the name of the region bears some negative connotation. It has converted in a bad word, meaning political fragmentation, conflict, things like that. The origin of all this is 19th century. Also, the First World War started in the Balkans, and in the 1990s, the breakup of Yugoslavia unleashed several violent conflicts that cemented the tarnished image of the region. However, in the 21st century, actually, there was quite economic growth in most of the countries, living standard improved. Even 4 countries, Slovenia, Romania, Bulgaria, and Croatia, joined the European Union, where Greece already was in the European Union since the early 80s. Today, or the last years, we have Albania, Montenegro, Macedonia, or Northern Macedonia, and Serbia are countries that are negotiating their entrance in the European Union. Nevertheless, Bulgaria, Romania are still the poorest countries in the European Union. The European Union membership is not universally accepted by the entire population. There's certain feelings of anti-Europe in sentiments and a lot of the member countries, but also the candidates. And of course, there are several latent conflicts in the region that remain unresolved, and they pose a great risk in the current volatile geopolitical situation. So in this webinar, we will focus first on in the first part especially, we'll focus on the European Union membership. How did the Balkan countries enter in European Union? What were the costs, the benefits? What were the main challenges for the members, and then now for the new applicant, the countries that try to enter in the future. And we will talk about the institutions, national institutions, the building of national institutions. We have 3 experts on these topics. First, I will start with Associate Professor Kaloyan Simeonov. He has the same name as mine. It's a good name. So he has a lot of experience with the negotiating with the European Union, and he's teaching European studies since 20 years already. He was the head of the Department of European Studies at the Sofia University, if I'm not correct. He has 2 PhDs in economics and European Studies. He has worked in the Ministry of Finance, in the Ministerial Council. He has more than 70 publications in Bulgarian international journals. He has books on European integration, and he's author of several studies on European topics. He has participated in numerous projects in Kosovo, Northern Cyprus, or points of conflict, no? Bosnia and Herzegovina, Macedonia, Montenegro, Ukraine, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and others. He will present to us, no, the benefits and the cost of European membership, the process, and the current situation with the current applicants. Then we have Lubomira Popova. She's also from the European Studies Department of the Sofia University's Kliment Ohridski, Sofia University, Kliment Ohridski, Saint Kliment Ohridski, or Kliment de Ohrid. She had her PhD. She also had PhD, and her PhD is on the Bulgarian preparation for the European Union membership as a part of the process of the European Union enlargement in Central and Eastern Europe, and her research interests and publications are on the post-communist transformation in Central and Eastern Europe and preparation for the European Union membership. She will also focus on the Bulgarian preparation for the European Union. And then with the third participant it's Elena Georgieva Antonovska. She's a senior public specialist at the World Bank. She has 15 years of experience in public sector reform from the World Bank, European Commission, European Parliament. Before joining the World Bank, she worked for 3.5 years in the European Commission. She worked on supporting the accession process of the Western Balkans and Turkey. She was an evaluation officer for the European Union pre-accession assistance at the Directorate General for Enlargement in Brussels. She worked also before that in the European Parliament. She has master's degrees in government and development policy, in European public affairs, and also in Maastricht. She has another master. So she has masters degrees from different countries in Berlin and Belgium and in Holland. She was previously based in Washington, D.C. and worked on public sector reforms in Africa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, Botswana, in Europe and Central Asia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Bulgaria, Moldova, Azerbaijan. And she's currently based in Laos. That's why the photo is with the flag of Laos, where she leads the World Bank support to public financial management reforms. So after this presentation, I will give the word to Kaloyan Simeonov, and then maybe if somebody has some question, he can put it on they can send it on the chat, or to me or to everybody, or they could just speak when the presentation of the presenters is over. Maybe the question could be after the 3 presentations, but if somebody wants to ask something, he could do it at the moment. Okay, Kaloyan, you have the word.
Thank you very much, Kaloyan. And if I can try to share a map of Europe.
Let me just stop sharing. I have to stop sharing. Okay, so now you can do it.
Okay, I'll try to see if I can share it, because okay, if there's not, okay, perhaps now it works. Let's see. So I hope that you see the map of Europe. Is it right?
Yes. So
okay.
Only one thing. Uruguay doesn't recognize Kosovo, so our department, they're not very happy with the maps showing, but doesn't matter.
If it's necessary, I can share the map.
No, it's a joke. It's a joke. I don't think it's a problem.
Okay. So of course, I will mention some words also about Kosovo, just because I have a lot of experience there, and it's quite interesting. So, but in this part of the Balkans, so that means part of our today agenda, and also it's a big challenge for the region, and of course it's also a big challenge for the world and for the world legal order. I'll be very brief, and we'll try with Lubomira and Elena to be brief, because we not to take all the time, because we really expect to have a lot of questions from the audience. I think taking into account this kind of meetings, and that's also online, it's always better to have a conversation, to have a dialogue. Therefore, if there are immediate questions, and if Kaloyan, please check, and if there is a raised hand, just interrupt me. So that's why we try to be brief, and to leave the room and time for questions and answers. I'll start with explaining. I know that the audience know about the European Union, the enlargement, but I will start with very few reminders about how the European Union was founded. So what is very important to know and to remember is that the European Union was founded by only 6 member states: France, Germany, Netherlands, Italy, Belgium, and Luxembourg. And now it comprises 27 member states. And when we speak about Balkans and the challenges, this is a big challenge, because at the beginning it was meant to be another organization, and now it's an organization that comprises almost all the European continent, and the countries are very different. And to be part of the European Union today, you should be homogeneous. That means that you should be similar to the other member states. And with 27, or let's say in the future 33, 34, etc., member states, it is very difficult to be done. So what can we see on the map, more colorful picture? This is the today European Union. And so it's very interesting also to check and to see what are the countries that are not part of the European Union today, and that are, of course, part of Europe, also geographically. I'll speak about the United Kingdom just in a minute, but what is interesting is Norway, Iceland, and there is very small country, Liechtenstein. They are also members of the so-called European Economic Area, so they are members even of the EU internal market, but they don't participate in how to shape it. So what are the other countries that are not member of the EU and that are countries in Europe? Of course, Switzerland is a very interesting example, but I not put too much attention on it right now. Another very interesting group of countries, but perhaps this is another topic for another conference. These are Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia. And of course, at the end of the meeting, because of the end of the presentation, I'll speak a little bit about the future enlargement, because Ukraine and Moldova are already candidate countries, and Georgia has a perspective to be a new member state as well. But this is for the end of our intervention with Lubomira. And there is also another very interesting country, which is in fact, you can see on the map, even there is not the name of that country, Turkey. Because it's part of the Balkan Peninsula as well. There is a very small region that is part of Europe, and that's why it's also very often is considered as part of the Balkan countries. And also there is a very interesting fact that Turkey is also a candidate country for EU membership. But of course, we can. This is also another topic of discussion. What is interesting in relation to the United Kingdom is that the United Kingdom was also part of the EU. It was, I don't know how, if it's well known in Uruguay, and I was in a lecture in China, and the Chinese students, they didn't know what is the word Brexit. I suppose that your students know it, but just to remember that this is the exiting of the United Kingdom from the European Union. Why it's so important, and why I put it in my introductory words? The simple reason is that the United Kingdom was the second largest economy in EU 28, the second largest economy in EU 28 after Germany, before France. Also, another important fact is that this is the first time when there is a withdrawal of a country from the European Union. Always there was enlargement, the EU was enlarging, etc. So it became 28 member states, and now there is one big, important country with global influence that just decided to go out. So that's a very interesting issue also, even when speaking about Western Balkans, although the Brexit did not affect so much Western Balkans, it affected mostly countries like Ireland, Netherlands, Spain, etc. But it is an interesting case. So I will end up, and I'll give the floor to Lubomira, because the topics are challenges. for the Balkan region. There are a lot of differences between the Eastern enlargement, that means Poland, to the European Union, that means Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, the three Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Romania, and the Balkan countries. One of these challenges is that the situation now is very different. When our countries, including Bulgaria, was entering in the European Union, almost there was no other perspective for us. It was in the 90s and in the very beginning of the current century, but there was just, I mean, there was no question. I mean, there was question only for very few people in our countries, but there was no other big players and there was no other alternatives. And now, currently, for the Western Balkans, and this is just the first challenge, to be frank, these countries, they're influenced by many other players instead of the European Union. One of them, of course, is the United States. Another one is Russia. For example, Russia has a very strong influence in some countries like Serbia. This is the biggest example of having a strong influence of Russia in one of the Balkan countries, the main one, the biggest one. And of course, one of the reasons for that is Kosovo, to be frank, because you know also that Russia is one of the countries that didn't recognize Kosovo and one of the biggest supporters of Serbia in that sense. So, but except the United States, except Russia, China also has a great influence. A lot of investments are done in the Western Balkans, especially in some of the not so rich countries that also create an issue. Turkey is another big player, to be frank. Also in the Western Balkans, and also many other places, including Saudi Arabia. So the situation currently in the Balkans is very different. Even some people, and I end up with this. This is the last introductory section. I was in a school in Bulgaria, in another town, and I was speaking about Bulgaria, not about Serbia, about Western Balkans, about Albania, North Macedonia, etc. I was speaking about Bulgaria. And I talked to the students and to the teachers in that school, look, there is no another alternative for Bulgaria. We are a member of the EU. We should stay a member of the EU, and that's it. So there is no another alternative. And one of the teachers, not of the students, asked me, but why you are thinking so? BRICS, this organization that we start to speak globally more and more, that's another alternative for Bulgaria. And this is just to provoke the audience. And I stop here, and Lubomir will continue with some differences between Western Balkans and Eastern enlargement, and I'll end up with some very few words about which are the benefits and about experience of benefits and cost of EU membership.
Lumira?
I see that she's online. Just
Okay.
Hey, can you hear me okay? Yes,
Yes.
I'm very sorry. My connection disconnected just for a second, so I'm back. That's great. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a big pleasure to be here, and I really hope that this turns into an interesting discussion in the end with lots of questions. So the focus of my presentation will be on the Bulgarian preparatory process for EU membership. Why Bulgaria? Because many of the imperfections of the EU's enlargement policy became evident precisely through the Bulgarian case, through the problems of the Bulgarian integration into the EU. And in this sense, the Bulgarian case can be considered most instructive for finding the pitfalls of the enlargement policy, which need to be corrected in the current enlargement round. On the one hand, because the situation is much more complicated today, as Professor Semyonov already mentioned. On the other hand, because the situation still greatly resembles the context of the Eastern enlargement, but in a much greater scope and scale. So there is no room for the same mistakes to be made, let's put it that way. I will start with a quick historical background of the Eastern enlargement. The perspective for the integration of the Central and Eastern European countries to the European Union appeared with the end of the Cold War. You probably know that, but the collapse of the Soviet Union presented a series of challenges to the Western Balkan states. On the one hand, internally, the balance of power was challenged with Germany's unification and its growing power. On the other hand, externally, the newly formed post-communist states created challenges for security, border disputes, minority issues, ecological crisis, and lots of that, which was very close to the border of the current European communities. And last but not least, Russia's geopolitical and economic interests were still not defined in this region. However, its military power and possession of natural resources placed the Western countries in a position of dependence. And integrating the former communist states to the European structures was, in fact, the only possible non-military solution to this complex geopolitical challenge. These countries' political, economic, and societal models, however, were completely incompatible with the basic values which form the European integration. So the countries needed to undergo major transformations in order to be integrated successfully. And this frames the task behind this enlargement process. The task was to induce irreversible reforms, to support the countries in their transition to democracy, market economy, adherence to the principles of the rule of law. And it's important to know that this was a different task compared to the previous enlargement round, when it was predominantly to achieve market integration. At the same time, the actual substance of the integration process had changed. The evolution of the European communities to a European Union with a clear political dimension was a reflection of this same geopolitical challenge. But the novel character of the task required dedicated political efforts in order to be resolved. So this is why we can speak of enlargement policy for the first time during the Eastern enlargement. The need to integrate the post-communist states created many questions which were very difficult to resolve and very sensitive between the member states, including which countries can join. Can all of them join? Probably not, but which ones with priority? What conditions they need to meet in order to join? And so on. All these issues were more or less unresolvable between the member states because they concerned their interests, and their interests rarely corresponded here. So the process was dedicated to the European Commission, who was seen as an administrative non-political actor who can really handle the process and give objective assessments as to which countries are ready and which countries are not. This was a smart political move. However, it had its consequences in the way the process was handled in practice. On the one hand, the decision, the final decision or the final recommendation which the Commission made remained political because it had to suit the interests of the member states. And if we see just one example, the countries which were invited to start membership negotiations in Luxembourg in 1997, based on the Commission's recommendations, what we see. First, we see Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. These two countries were always considered to be the front runners of the process. But in fact, later studies have proved that Poland was running much behind the other two with the preparation and was in fact much closer to the second group. But the reality was that there was a general view that no enlargement can take place without Poland. If there will be one country to join, it will be Poland. So it was automatically put as the front runner of the process. Then we see Estonia. This was a clear sign to the Baltic states that membership is possible. Slovenia was a similar sign to the Balkan states. So we see how this political element in the evaluations was always there. Another consequence of this move was that the preparatory process was made more administrative. And in this way, the reformed efforts were very often measured through tick boxes. In a way, it was simplified, giving priority to the transfer of the EU rules, the acquis communautaire. There was a process of, is this law available in the national legislation? Yes, tick. But how is it being applied? Does it contradict with any other laws? Is this a real practice? Very often remained outside. So this was just a quick introduction that there are aspects of the process we need to open our eyes for. But of course, the efforts of the Commission led to the successful completion of the first phase of the Eastern enlargement in 2004, when 10 countries joined the European Union, leaving Bulgaria and Romania outside. As part of a scientific project, I had the pleasure to take an interview with Günther Verheugen, who was the first commissioner for enlargement and is often described as the biggest enthusiast for the Eastern enlargement. And in his interview, he clearly stated that back in 1999, when he was taking the office of an enlargement commissioner, Bulgaria and Romania were not even foreseen as members in the foreseeable future in any way. Why is that? On the one hand, there are definitely socioeconomic reasons for the two countries to be considered different, because the reform process was indeed taking place slower. At the same time, if we look back at the map that Professor Simionov showed, if we can look one more time, we will see actually that, thank you very much, that all the newly joined countries formed sort of a sanitary zone between the European Union and Russia and its satellites. And if we see here, Bulgaria and Romania, they find themselves a little bit outside this sanitary zone. So back then, they didn't seem so important in terms of the security, which we already said it was the basic motive to search enlargement. The situation changed greatly with the Kosovo crisis, when the importance attached to the Balkan region raised. At the same time, Bulgaria and Romania showed loyalty to NATO, opening their airspace for the NATO campaign against Yugoslavia. And this opened the door for their successful entering into the European Union. It is not a secret that they were let in partially unprepared, with a conditional clause and with a special mechanism designed to help them catch up. And from today's perspective, we see that Bulgaria has still not managed to catch up fully, unfortunately. And when I say this, I don't mean to undermine the huge benefits that came into Bulgaria because of the membership. I'm sure that Professor Simionov will mention a little bit about that later as well. But taking into account that this is a 100% positive thing for the Bulgarian society, we have to also look for the imperfections of the process in order to be able to correct them for the future. With this, I want to present a fragment of the results of an empirical investigation which I have made. If we go to the next slide. So this investigation was dedicated to the Bulgarian preparatory process for EU membership. And it was done in an unconventional method by structuring the memories of the participants in the process. I have taken 47 interviews with different participants, including prime ministers, deputy prime ministers, chief negotiators, diplomats, experts. One of the speakers was actually one of the respondents was actually Professor Simionov, who was also practically involved in the process. And by structuring the memories, I found out very interesting things about the process. I have picked these characteristics here for today's presentation because they have to do with the quality of the interaction, and I thought they will be more interesting for the audience. So what we can see here, we can see that the two main parties in the process, the left side shows the perceptions of the Bulgarian participants, the right side shows the perceptions of the members of the European Commission. So we can really compare and contrast the two viewpoints. And what we can see here is that the two actors are pretty distant to each other, felt pretty distant to each other. Very, very often the Bulgarian respondents were speaking about some people there in Brussels who were speaking Brussels language, using Brussels vocabulary and so on. Similarly to the enlargement commissioner, whose interview has been taken for these results, Bulgaria came from a completely different place, had completely different political culture, different history, different language group, and in fact the only semantic accent which has to do, which ended up in the closeness category, was describing Bulgaria as the poor relative. All of the other semantic accents really showed distance rather than closeness. What's even more interesting, staying at the commissioner's memories, we see that Bulgaria is 100% described as a reactive player, reacting to the situation, fitting in within the window of opportunity. This phrase was actually used also a lot by the Bulgarian participants. And then we see that in some instances it is presented as a saboteur, when some aspects of the preparation were concerned, or probably the interests of some of the actors. One of the Bulgarian prime ministers was actually described as totally unfriendly and unwilling to participate in certain initiatives. It's even more interesting to look at the perception of the Bulgarian team at the Commission's requirements. We see that they are above all perceived as unclear and inconsistent. And I want to give some examples here as well. They were saying one thing, the next day they're saying another thing, or they say, oh, you do what they say, and then they say, oh, well, yes, but, and give another instruction. But of course, there was the other side where in minority, the European Commission is presented as a stable partner, true professionals, and so on. It's interesting to see what was the direction of the Commission's requirements. We already mentioned a little bit about that, whether it was towards real reforms or more towards transfer of rules. We see that in the perception reflecting the respondents' own practical experience, the focus was actually towards the acquis transfer, the transfer of the rules, rather than achieving real reforms. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about the quality of the interaction. It's very interesting to see that in both cases, the relationship between the two parties is presented as a relationship of two actors who are in power asymmetry rather than equal partners. And this is more pronounced in the memories of the commissioner. This is a characteristic which can be traced in the whole Eastern enlargement process, but it's a little bit more easily recognized in the Bulgarian case. And finally, we see that the relationship was predominantly ineffective. In the Bulgarian case, the prevalence of the ineffectiveness is not much, it's a little bit. We see that again, we go back to the speaking Brussels language, using Brussels vocabulary. Some of the respondents speak about relationship crisis, but we have also the other side saying that go into details. They were very instrumental. In the commissioner's memories, this balance is even higher, and in his interview he clearly said that I would have expected policymakers in Bulgaria to communicate more clearly. So what are the conclusions we can draw from here very briefly? So we see that there is incompatibility in the perceptions of the two main actors, which inevitably results to the absence of a clear shared goal, which leads to minimizing the tasks to what they have in common, which is the rule transfer. And in this sense, we can expect partially incomplete reforms, which provide grounds for problems during the membership. And now the question is to what extent these flaws of the process have been recognized and corrected in the new enlargement methodology, which was adopted in 2020 for the Western Balkan states, but it has been rapidly evolving to suit also the needs for the Eastern Partnership countries. I will just mention some of the differences very quickly. I will pick 3 positive and some negative, and I will end there. On the positive side, we see a difference in the definition of the task. It has now been openly defined as a geopolitical priority for the European Union. The enlargement process has always come as a reflection to the geopolitical context. However, for the first time, this is so clearly articulated. Then moving forward, a novelty of the process is a priority attached to the rule of law and the so-called fundamentals cluster, which includes chapters related to judiciary, public procurement, justice, freedom, and security. These chapters are now opened first, and they remain open until the end of the process. So at any point, the Commission can go back if something goes wrong. And then another positive example is the so-called gradual integration approach, which is really being exploited in various sectors of the single market. This means that the countries will gain access to these aspects of the membership which they're most prepared for. And in this sense, this could solve one of the biggest problems of the Eastern enlargement, which was the idea of the membership as the end goal of the process. This has been exploited in the coordination of economic and social policy under the European semester, which is being replicated in the enlargement countries. And now all candidate countries submit annual economic reform programs to the European Commission. Another example are different transnational cooperation programs, or the novelty that the annual rule of law report will now be available to the countries which are further in their preparation. So these are all positive examples. And then moving on to some of the shortcomings, I want to mention that we see a very big tension in all of the official statements between the fact that the process is described as merit-based, meaning that all countries progress based on their own merits, with their own speed, and then the other contradictory statement that no enlargement can take place before the EU is enlargement ready. This is a clear contradiction, and on that note, there is still no definition explaining what merit means. What does it mean that they progress based on their own merits? And what is required to get the EU enlargement ready too? Does it require a proper treaty reform, or can it be achieved within the framework of the existing treaty? So this question needs to be answered if the process needs to go in a different direction. And then another shortcoming, regardless of all the clear declarations that real results and reforms will be pursued now, we see that the success will still be measured through the old principle of a key transfer, transferring tick boxes and transferring and checking which rules have been transferred yet. But as I already tried to prove with my presentation, this is the principle which created one of the biggest problems of the Eastern enlargement. So if we want to see qualitatively different results, this principle has to be redefined. Of course, we are about to see in what direction the enlargement methodology will evolve. So it's too early to make any final conclusions. This was from me. I hope I wasn't too much out of the time. I want to give back the floor to Professor Simeonov because I'm sure he wants to add something, and yes, he has more to talk about. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you. I'll not to take too much more time, 3 or 4 minutes to finish our presentation with Lubomira. So it's very interesting because in fact, I have the impression that the differences between the Balkan countries and the Eastern enlargement are much greater than the similarities, although this is the same process. This is the same European Union law. This is should be the same, more or less the same procedures. But in fact, it's very different. And one of the big differences, and speaking also about challenges in the Balkan region, one of the big differences is time. Time in terms of which year we are currently, 2024, and time in terms of how much time it took to the Eastern countries from Central and Eastern Europe to become part of the EU, and how much time is taken today for the Western Balkan countries, Serbia, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, to negotiate, and how much time takes Bosnia and Herzegovina to be recognized as a candidate country, and Kosovo, because of the issue of recognition, but not only, is even only a potential candidate country. Just to mention, Kaloyan, that also I'm sure that you know this very well, but there are also 5 EU member states that does not recognize Kosovo. And speaking about challenges, how you can negotiate with a country to become a member of the EU with a country that you don't recognize. I mean, that's quite a strange thing. Just to mention one challenge, these 5 countries are Spain, Greece, Cyprus, Romania, and Slovakia. So this is just one challenge, just to see how different is the situation. Also, because I'm an economist, I like to speak with figures. So the negotiations between Bulgaria the least developed EU country today that some people mentioned. I don't share this opinion, but some people say the negotiations with Bulgaria took 4 years and a half. 4 years and a half. And currently Serbia, which is the most developed country, and Montenegro, that has the least problem with minorities, etc., etc., only 600,000 people, they negotiate more than 10 years. And they are far, far, far away from EU membership. So you see, this is a really great challenge. Another challenge was already mentioned. This is the big influence of many other players in the Balkan region. I will not speak now about the cost and benefits of EU enlargement because there is no time. I'll just mention one benefit. This is the big internal market. So this internal market of 27 plus 3. This is 30 member states, common standards, etc., etc. Of course, the big cost is whenever you become a member of the EU. Whenever you become a member of the EU, you give part of your sovereignty because now part of the decisions are not taken in Sofia, part of the decisions are taken in Brussels, of course, with the participation of Bulgaria and Sofia, but still this is not the only one sovereign decisions. If I can make a parallel, but this is not a good parallel to be frank, like with Mercosur. I mean, one there is a decision in Mercosur, so all the member states more or less they should in South America they should stick to it. I mean, but this is, to be frank, this is not exactly a very good comparison. And finishing with really a big challenge, I suppose that the war in Ukraine looks far, far away from the point of view of Uruguay, but to be frank, from Bulgarian point of view, it's very close. Just if I think that I already shared again the map. If you see the map, especially for Bulgaria and Romania, even for Romania is even much closer. So we share more or less the same border because this is the Black Sea. So I mean, this is quite close to our borders. Is the current war in Ukraine. So I just want to mention one very important challenge because our main topic is not the war in Ukraine, is the challenges in the Balkan Peninsula. If at the beginning of this year, in January, you know that in January this year, of course, there were some rumors that a war in Ukraine could start. But at least in our continent, at least in our country, the expectation of war was that this kind of war will not start, to be frank. And so if in January somebody told me that Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia will be a candidate countries for EU membership, I will start to laugh. Completely. I would say, no, this is not possible. Perhaps in 5, 10 years, 15 years, maybe, but not in 2 months. What happened? That the war started in the 22nd of, I speak about the beginning of 2022. And after a few weeks, the war started in Ukraine in February, 24th of February 2022. And just after one week after, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, they apply for EU membership. Why this is so important for Western Balkans? This is very important because this changes dramatically the dynamics. Because you see, for example, for Bosnia and Herzegovina, the recognition as a candidate status, it took at least 15 years, I think even more, 20 years. And for Ukraine and Moldova, the recognition as a candidate status and starting negotiation, it took something like 1 year. See, 20 times quicker. So now the dynamics in the Western Balkans are very different. And of course, this is a very deep issue and an issue that is currently very dynamic and active. And there are a lot of questions and very few answers on that topic. So I leave here as an endpoint, and I hope that me and Lubomira has provoked the audience for some questions. But I suppose that first the other speaker will say a few words, and really hope to have some discussion.
Thank you, Kaloyan and Lubomira. Yes, I also have some question on the topic. Little comment: the war in Ukraine. Maybe the name is not no more. It's not correct because there's also war in Russia. This is another thing. So we will give the word now to Elena Georgieva Andonovska, and she also will present from the inside part of the process, from the point of view World Bank, which was also involved, no, and especially in the Western Balkans, I think. So, thank you, Elena. You have the word.
Thanks very much, Kaloyan, and thanks to Kaloyan and Lubomira. These were fascinating presentations. Let me just start by that. It's great that academics are looking into this, because when you're on the inside, and I was at the inside, sitting on the European Commission desk, looking at the acquis communautaire and assessing how countries have fulfilled it or not. I was a policy officer at the beginning at the Director General for Health and Consumers, and I was actually the one for for a year who was basically doing this assessment, whether countries in the Western Balkans are close to or have adopted to a certain degree, or to what degree, the acquis communautaire or the EU laws in terms of health, public health, and consumer protection. So it's a very interesting process, and it's good to have an external point of view and also academic research and criticism into it, because when you're inside, it's very difficult to think outside of the box, or to assess it and to challenge it. But I think the bottom line is that it's a very complex process, and it's both political and technical. And this is also where the World Bank comes in. It tries to support the countries to meet the technical requirements while the political process is ongoing. And in my view, the political process is always ongoing. And what Kaloyan ended with the differences in standards, if you wish, between the Western Balkans and now Ukraine. It's palpable indeed, but I think it's because of lessons learned, and the EU had to do this because they did a big mistake, in my view, by being so slow, for all of us, by being so slow in the Western Balkans and dragging our feet for so long. I also have a personal stake, let's say, in this. I'm married to a Macedonian, a national of North Macedonia, another aspiring country, and I can just see the change of perceptions, the change in attitudes, the growing resentment, the disillusionment. And I recall how this was not the case at the beginning, when the country was still freshly, let's say, aspiring, when there was hope, when the EU Commission was actually reporting, I think, every year, let's open up negotiations with Macedonia, let's proceed. And it seemed that EU membership is possible. But it turned out that with years, it is not possible. And even the staunchest and the hardest of EU optimists became pessimists. They just don't have another choice. I think there's still hope, but it's very, very difficult, fascinating process. So I just wanted to reflect on that. Let me share my screen. I do have a presentation that is slightly longer, but I'll try to go quickly through it so that we have more time for discussion. Let me move that triangle properly. Okay, I hope you can see that. Is that okay? I don't think I can see anyone else right now. I just see my screen. Okay, it is. Thank you, Kaloyan. All right, so a little bit slightly changing of topic. Now I'll talk about the World Bank and its role in the EU enlargement. But first, I would like to start by what is the World Bank. It's a well-known institution, but maybe not all of you know it that well, may have only heard about it. And then I'll give a few examples of how the World Bank is supporting the EU enlargement, the past enlargements, and also the current enlargement. So on to the part one about the World Bank. And I hope, this goes on together. Do you see the whole slide or just a little bit of the slide? Probably the whole slide. Because I had some animations going on, but I guess I don't have them anymore. That's all right. Anyway,
we can see it perfectly.
You can see, but it's okay. It's everything probably.
Yes,
because I have like 5 boxes that we're going to come in.
We see everything from the Bretton Woods to now, to 19.
Yeah,
that's fine. That's
it's
fine.
okay.
I think it's important to look at the evolution of the World Bank. for some context. So the World Bank is one of the leading development institutions in the world. At the beginning, it was the only one, perhaps, or at least the only one, the only development bank. It's the oldest one, definitely, created in 1944 together with the IMF, so actually even before the EU. And the original goal was to create a framework for post-war international economic cooperation and reconstruction. So these were the goals at this UN conference when both the World Bank and the IMF were created, mainly because, as we know, because of World War II, Europe was devastated and there was a need to rebuild the infrastructure of Europe. So essentially, actually, the World Bank starts supporting Europe and European integration from its very beginning, and this was one of the reasons why it was created. And the first loan of the World Bank is to France to support infrastructure development. Because the audience is from Uruguay, I was checking that the first loan to Uruguay is from 1950, so quite soon actually after the creation of the World Bank. So initially it's a lot about reconstruction, but then once the Marshall Plan takes over the reconstruction of Europe, the World Bank turns more to infrastructure projects globally. And hence the first loan outside of Europe is to Chile, actually, then other loans to other countries follow. But the focus between the 40s and the 60s is on building infrastructure, power, so big projects. And the World Bank is staffed with economists and engineers. Key developments in 50s and 60s are the creation of a part of the World Bank that is responsible for private sector development and another part that is responsible for lending to the poorest countries in the world. So from this infrastructure building in the 60s, late 60s, 70s, 80s, the World Bank turns more to supporting poverty eradication. So in the 70s, there is a realization that a lot of the people, or 40% of the people living in developing countries are poor, extremely poor. And based on this, the World Bank turns its attention to poverty eradication, not just reconstruction, growth, but also specifically for poverty. And this is when in the 70s, the World Bank's goals are coined to accelerate growth and poverty and reduce poverty. And the World Bank's work also expands in other sectors. So beyond transport infrastructure, now the World Bank is looking and supporting more sectors like irrigation, water, health, education, so more into social sectors. Then in the 80s and 90s, the famous structural adjustment programs, which I think Uruguay has also benefited from, focusing on liberalization, fiscal discipline, raising of taxes, privatization, and so on, which of course were faced with criticism, rightly so, because maybe not enough attention was being paid to how certain parts of the population will suffer from such reforms. So based on lessons learned from that, again, the institution is evolving and its mandate is evolving towards then from the 90s onwards, an even stronger focus on poverty eradication, shared prosperity, looking into education, health, human capital, supporting countries around the world to fulfill the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, and currently the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. An important development was the recognition that corruption is a big impediment to development. And this was also mentioned in the presentations. I think it is one for many of the countries, especially in the Western Balkans and Bulgaria as well. It is at least quoted as one of the major stumbling blocks why these countries cannot accede to the European Union. It is because of corruption. But corruption is prevalent everywhere, including in developing countries. So the World Bank recognized this so-called cancer of corruption and decided to address it in its operations, but also to fund projects that aim at fighting corruption. And this also created the World Bank's department and specialists who deal with these issues. Currently, we're called the Governance Department or the Governance Global Practice. And this is where I'm also based. So we help countries to build their public sector to be more accountable, transparent, efficient, and thereby also less corrupt. And of course, today we focus a lot on climate change and digital development. Just again, briefly, it's a very global institution. We have 189 member countries. All of the countries that we mentioned today, they are members of the World Bank. They're also shareholders. So we are owned by our client governments. And we work across the globe. It is the only institution, I would say, the only development bank that is truly global. The others are more regionally oriented, like EBRD, which is the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development focused on Europe, or the African Development Bank, or the Asian Development Bank. Maybe some of the students are interested in joining the World Bank. Please check our website. It is a fascinating institution that I'm very proud of working at. So I encourage you to check it out because it has a noble mission to help poor countries and to help also the poor in advanced countries. So for example, in the Western Balkans, even if the countries are middle-income countries, there are inequalities within the countries and lagging regions, as the EU calls it, also including within Europe. So the World Bank's mission is to try to help the poor in those regions, the pockets of poverty that are also in middle-income and even high-income countries, and to focus on them and what policies governments need to design to specifically address the needs of these people. The World Bank is actually comprised of 5 institutions. Again, this is relevant for the types of support that we provide. So what we do is we finance public projects to build, as we heard, physical but also social infrastructure and develop institutional capacity. Again, very important for the enlargement process. And we provide expertise, research, and analysis. So these two always go together. We're not just a bank that provides a loan or financing. We always provide also technical expertise and very comprehensive and deep analysis of issues, of policies, of systems, which help us provide evidence-based recommendations. So the bank has 5 institutions. The first one that was created in 1944, this is the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. As the name says, it was created for reconstruction and supporting development, but it provides loans to middle-income and some low-income countries. For example, it provides loans to Uruguay, but also to all of the Balkan countries currently. Then in 1960, another institution was created as part of the World Bank, which is the International Development Association, or IDA. And it focuses specifically on the poorest countries, and it provides zero or low interest loans and grants, which do not have to be repaid, as well as, of course, technical assistance. So these are loans meant for countries who cannot possibly borrow on the global markets and have no other access to finances. For example, I think Kaloyan mentioned, I worked in the Central African Republic. It is quite a troubled country struck by conflict and violence and instability. So our IDA assistance is for those countries, but also Kosovo. Kosovo falls into that situation. Then in 1956, the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, was created. So this is the arm of the World Bank, which mobilizes private sector investment and provides advice. So the IFC invests in the private sector. So it could, for example, fund a company in Serbia to and help it expand its production or go to another market. Then in 1988, MIGA, or the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, was created. So this is again linked to the World Bank's mission. It provides political risk insurance, as you can imagine, in countries like the DRC or Central African Republic, but also in Kosovo, potentially in others from the countries that we're talking about. There is a political risk. There is a risk of, for example, expropriation by the government or some instability, and investors are reluctant to invest in these countries. So here comes MIGA, which covers this political risk. And last but not least, not well-known institution, but an important one, the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes from 1966. It provides arbitration of disputes between a foreign investor and a host state. So if there is a dispute between a company and a country, they can, I guess before going to court, they can actually try to settle this dispute through this institution, which is neutral. So that's about an overview of the World Bank, just very quickly. And now, how have we supported the EU enlargement process? I think the bottom line is the first sentences, which were supposed to appear on their own, but now appear together with everything else. That's all right. So the bank played a significant role in supporting the accession process of Eastern European countries, which joined in 2004, 7, and 13 Croatia. And of course, currently it is still helping the Western Balkans. And the World Bank support was aimed at helping these countries meet the accession criteria. We didn't mention explicitly, but the criteria broadly are political, economic, and legislative. Political meaning to have a democratic state, economic, just shortly, economic to have a functioning market economy, and legislative to adopt the acquis. So I would argue that it is really not just a box-ticking exercise, which perhaps tends to be the legislative part, but there are also political and economic criteria which need to be met. How this is judged, I guess it could be argued that it may be subjective, unfair to some, but these are currently, I guess, still the criteria. But the Commission, for example, or the EU would say, okay, you have to meet these criteria. Then the countries are asking, well, how can we do that? And this is where an institution like the World Bank steps in, of course, other institutions as well, other development banks or other organizations, and they're trying to help the countries with the how. So how can we do that? How can we have all of a sudden a functioning market economy? Of course, it does not happen over time, but this is when the World Bank can provide its finance, both its finance and its technical knowledge. So for example, in a big part of the World Bank's support to enlargements, to past enlargements and the current one, was to provide economic reform and policy advice for macroeconomic stability, to advise on fiscal policies, monetary policies. We're still a bank predominantly with economists, although we have people from all fields as well. So they're really experts in this. Support to structural reforms. In all of these countries, many sectors had to be restructured, especially energy, transport, other utilities, agriculture, to improve efficiency and to meet EU standards as well and to be competitive. And a big part is, of course, public sector management. So assisting with the modernization of public administration and improving governance and transparency, including fighting corruption. So I'm not sure if this is well known, but the World Bank has been and still is supporting countries in those particular areas, and this is actually my department is doing that. So this is one area. An example from that, I just picked a project from Romania, but it could be any other country. So this was a programmatic adjustment loan, I guess something like a successor of a structural adjustment loan, but improved, let's say. And its objective was to establish growth in Romania, reduce poverty, basically reflecting the World Bank's objectives, but also to facilitate its joining the EU. So very explicitly, the World Bank projects in all of these countries were tailored or were designed to support these countries' enlargement aspirations. And this is also because the World Bank model is country-based. So we focus on a country's own strategy and we support the implementation of that strategy. And of course, the strategies of all of these countries aspiring to join the EU were around how to join the EU and meeting all of these criteria, political, economic, and legislative. So naturally, all of our assistance as well was tailored towards meeting EU accession requirements as well. So, for example, this loan or a loan series, a series of financing instruments, it focused on macroeconomic stability in Romania, but also core public sector reform, like, for example, strengthening the independence of the judicial system, a very thorny subject that still, I think, haunts Romania and Bulgaria, and probably still haunts and will continue to haunt the Balkan countries, the Western Balkan countries. Very difficult to reform, but we have been providing over many years support to this particular specific topic, as well as, for example, helping countries reform their civil service, make it more transparent, and review the pay and grading structures. I was leading, for example, a project in Serbia, which was also meant to do exactly that, and of course was part of Serbia's EU accession negotiations as part of their public administration reform strategy. They wanted to right-size their public administration. They also wanted to review the pay and grading structure, and the World Bank funded this with some $70 million. And at some point in time, in 2018, I was overseeing the implementation of that project. Moving on, so other types of support is a lot of institutional strengthening. So one of the criteria is for the institutions of the EU aspiring countries to have stable, functioning, well-functioning institutions which are able to assume the obligations and the rights of the EU and enforce the EU regulations and standards. So the World Bank has been providing capacity building and support to adoption of regulatory frameworks in line with EU standards. Of course, infrastructure development, a core business of the World Bank, was very relevant and it still is for the enlargement process today. Big infrastructure needs, big inequalities within countries, within regions, and between the aspiring countries and the EU. So a lot of need for infrastructure projects to support transport infrastructure, modernization of the energy sector, greening it, and of course, environmental protection. As you probably know, the EU is quite strict on environmental protection, and rightfully so, while I think most of the countries, based on their legacy previously, were not that strict, so there was a lot of need for improvement in this area. An example of such a project I picked from Hungary, municipal wastewater project funded by the World Bank. Its goal was to reduce pollution and, again, explicitly to strengthen compliance with Hungarian and European Union environmental standards. And this project, as far as I understand, was implemented successfully, and it did help Hungary to upgrade its wastewater treatment facilities and comply with EU environmental directives. Some people find these, very specific technical issues mundane or uninteresting. I personally find it fascinating that there is someone actually out there who is worried about wastewater treatment in a country. And to me, that's a huge added value of the European Union, maybe of other regional organizations as well. And I feel such pain that some countries or some people still don't appreciate this enough. But maybe that's something that we have to collectively work on. Moving on, other areas of support of the World Bank to these countries, for example, social development, so that to ensure that the benefits of EU accession are broadly shared by everyone. Of course, this is not finished work, it's a work in progress, but a lot of World Bank investments in education and health, reforming education systems, teacher training, curriculum, as well as healthcare, pension system. So basically pretty much every aspect of human capital development, the World Bank has been supporting, starting social protection programs, cash transfers, you name it. And last but not least, a lot of technical assistance, analytical and advisory services. I think I mentioned already, but not just financing, loans. We do a lot of analytical work. Some of it is also done together with academic institutions, so it does have academic rigor and quality. Others is more, let's say, action-oriented or policy-oriented, but still we were so-called knowledge bank, and we place a lot of emphasis on being very rigorous and evidence-based. So this was also applied in the case of the enlargement. I dug out an interesting report on Bulgaria from 2001. It's a 200-page report produced by the World Bank on the dual challenge of transition and accession. Interesting, fascinating reading, detailing in a lot of detail what Bulgaria, according to the World Bank, would need to do in order to surmount these two challenges, which were appearing at the same time. Transition and EU accession, and I guess reinforcing each other or creating even more challenges because they're happening at the same time. Almost finished there. So currently, World Bank and the current support to Western Balkans, I think the speakers mentioned that there are a lot of differences. That is probably the case, but at least from our point of view, many things remain the same. So we still focus on economic development and competitiveness. We invest in infrastructure, private sector development, very important for the Western Balkans because a lot of unemployment and also a lot of youth unemployment, creating social issues. So that's a big focus. Then another one is governance and institutional strengthening. I think we mentioned already that the chapters on justice and public administration reform and corruption, these are now the most important chapters. So of course the World Bank is now placing an even bigger focus on these areas. Environmental sustainability, of course, I think for everyone, this has become now front and center. Climate change, mitigation and adaptation. Globally, the World Bank is one of the leading financiers of climate change mitigation and adaptation, and the same towards the Western Balkans to invest in renewable energy, energy efficiency, and climate resilience. We know that they're prone to floods and other climate shocks. Still supporting environmental protection, and maybe a difference from before or a stronger focus is regional cooperation integration. Because of the troubled history of the Western Balkans, this is particularly important to have cross-border projects where countries and also regional projects which foster cooperation between these countries, because as we know, they were at war, many of them, and there's a need for reconciliation and for getting to know each other. And this is, of course, difficult when we don't have infrastructure, when we're not connected to each other, and when we don't share experiences and knowledge and we don't trade with each other. So there is a focus on such projects. And here's an example of such a project, the Western Balkans Trade and Transport Facilitation Project. It involves 3 countries. It is still an ongoing project. And it aims to reduce the trade costs, increase transport efficiency, which are critical for economic integration with the EU. So again, everything I would say that we do in the Western Balkans is in one way or the other geared towards helping these countries meet the EU requirements, be better prepared for EU accession, be better prepared to withstand the pressures once they accede to the EU. So this project is improving border crossing points, streamlining customs procedures. So again, kind of mundane, maybe boring things for citizens, but very important areas, without which actually I don't think a country can enter the EU without having fixed its customs procedures. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I was not too long, but these topics are really fascinating, and thanks to Kaloyan for the opportunity to talk. Let me stop share.
Thank you, Elena, and the Lumira Kaloyan also. It was really, really interesting. So I will open now the field for questions. If somebody from the audience would like to join us to ask something or to comment something, please feel free to do so. No. But if Virginia.
I just want to first of all thank you, the three of you, and thank you especially to Kaloyan Stanev to bring us the opportunity to hear you and to have this perspective that, as Simonov said, from Uruguay is seen as very, very far away, right? So this for our students, it's a great opportunity to listen in first person the experience of these countries as Bulgaria. And it was very nice to hear you, Kaloyan, speak in your language too. That's new for me. So as I was thinking in your presentation, Kaloyan, the other Kaloyan, I think I would like to know your perspective on how the experience of the Bulgaria parkour in entering the EU can help the Balkans, and that's one question. Other one is not maybe a question per se, but a comment to expand or develop. As you said, the process of being candidate of Ukraine and Moldavia was very quick, but in comparison maybe, but it was a very, very political decision, right? We all know that the being a member could take decades, right? So this I think this is different from the process that Romania and Bulgaria had as candidates at the moment. That's for me. Thank you again to all of you.
Thank you. Should I respond, Kaloyan?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the questions and for the comment. I'll be very brief, hoping to have more questions also from the audience. So yes, the experience of Bulgaria and Romania really can help the process in the Western Balkans. To be frank, I was also EU-funded expert from the European Commission in those countries, as Kaloyan mentioned in the presentation, mainly in North Macedonia, in Kosovo, in Bosnia, and in Montenegro as well. And also, I think these kind of experts, like from Bulgaria and Romania, sometimes they are even much more clever to show the case and to explain how to do the job from some other experts, for example, that never experienced enlargement, like the 6 founders, they didn't experience enlargement. So that's true that we can be very helpful for them because we live through this process. Although this, as I mentioned, this process is now much more different. And to be frank, even much more frank, I think that is, although that the processes are very same, they're also very different from a country to a country. So at the end, I was expert in Bulgarian administration when foreigners from EU member states came to explain how the enlargement should take place, how reforms are done. And after that, I became an expert going to other countries doing more or less the same. But at the end, these are the people that stay in home, the people from North Macedonia, the people from Albania, from Serbia, that should do the job. And also, as Elena also mentioned, the main problem is for Western Balkans, I think currently this is really the long process and the perspective that was, how to say, very slow to develop. And therefore, what happened in Ukraine and Moldova, such a big thing, this kind of a war in Ukraine, there could be some positive sign to make a new dynamics. Of course, It's much more better to have new dynamics by other issues, but it could help as a new dynamic in Western Balkans. And going back to Ukraine and Moldova, you are completely right. This is a political decision, and completely political decision. And I start wondering myself, what will happen after, and hopefully the war will finish very soon. What will happen in Ukraine and Moldova when they realize that the process would not be so quick as they expect? But I stop here because this is really something that there's so much uncertainty. But let's see.
In that sense, I have a question, which we are talking about the right window. No, you mentioned that Bulgaria, Romania, or Lubomira got promoted because of the Kosovo war. They gave airspace during the war of Kosovo. So this is the other topic, the NATO. What's the role of the NATO in the accession process? Somehow NATO membership is usually preceding European Union membership. This will not be the case for Serbia, clearly. We all know that. But NATO is also seen as a tool of the US foreign policy, no? So is there some tension or connection between the two processes? So obviously, Bulgaria and Romania gave their spaces for NATO planes, and this helped them enter the European Union. But I remember that in 2003, when Poland and other future new members supported the invasion of Iraq, Jacques Chirac, which was against the invasion of Iraq, was not very happy with the new members because they had this double loyalty. They're European Union members, but they follow the Americans. What's the story there, if is there any?
Yeah. I started my job in the Ministry of Finance '98, so this was before the war in Kosovo. And when accession negotiations started, I was always thinking that the accession negotiations started because we have done a great job, we started reforms, etc., etc. The first time that I hear that perhaps much more clearly, that perhaps because of giving the airspace for bombardment in Kosovo was so important that this give us a green line for starting accession negotiations early 2000. I was shocked a little bit. For me, this was a scandal. How someone can argue about that? But after step by step, I realized that if not completely true, it is not completely true. There is an influence. So on your question more directly, yes, there is a link, but this is not a direct link. This is not a contractual link. This is not a legal link. But this link is much more like a consequences, and the EU want a stable country to join the EU. And for sure, NATO gives to a great extent, perhaps not completely, but to a great extent, it gives this kind of a security. Looking now on the Western Balkan countries, Albania, Montenegro, North Macedonia, they are members of NATO. Again, that could not be a direct causal link. You mentioned Serbia, and we should mention also that NATO bombarded not only Kosovo, but NATO bombarded Serbia as well. So, I mean, this could not be such a link, because in how Serbia could become a member, at least so quickly, a member of an organization that bombarded your capital as well. So that's quite a tricky issue, to be frank. But there is no direct link, put it more simply. But in fact, there is again we go to the topic that this is a political process as well.
The United States also bombed Japan, and they held them later, or Germany. So Plan Marshall, is there some experience that you can bury the past and continue? Lubomira, you wanted to say something?
Just to add something, a little comment, I 100% agree with what Professor Simeon said, but I think this question also goes back to the biggest differences in the process, because in the Bulgarian and Romanian case, the orientation of these countries was 100% directed to the West. Internally, the perspective was that West is NATO and EU, and more or less it was seen as the same thing. But also externally, this two organizations were sort of leading the countries to the same path. However, now the situation is much more complex. There are much more geopolitical players. It's not just the past and the future. In the Bulgarian case, it was exactly this. The past is what it was, and then we have the future, which is NATO and the European Union. And now it's a little bit more complex, in my opinion. That's just a comment, a little comment.
Thank you, Lumira. Matthias, you have a question?
Yes. Firstly, I want to thank you for sharing this wonderful conversation, because I think that this a really specific and not really known subject here in Uruguay. And as I used to be your student, Kaloyan, for me it's a pleasure to talk to you again. Well, my question is based on Bulgaria, because I was wondering which was the biggest loss of sovereignty that Bulgaria had to endure during this process of joining up the EU, because I know that it has to do a lot of changes, and as Stanev said before, it was like a huge change in the dynamics, mostly in the market. But I would like to know which was the, in your point of view, of course, the most difficult subject to work on during this process of joining up the EU.
Thank you very much. This is a very, very good question. I will respond it in another perspective with something that is not going back to 2007, but something that is more actual and prominent today. But just also you should know that I'm speaking as an EU expert, and I'm quite devoted to EU, so I always look on the benefits and not. It's very difficult to look on the losses. For example, if we speak about finances, the more expensive policy of the EU is environmental policy. But is it a loss? It's not a loss, because I mean, of course, you should invest a lot, but after that, you live in a quite safer environment in Bulgaria. But taking into account your question, I just want to give an example of a loss that is currently very popular and active in Bulgarian society. Bulgaria is currently preparing to be a member of the Eurozone, of the Euro area. Perhaps you know that out of the 27 member states of the EU, there are 20 that are members in the Euro area, including France, Germany, etc., Italy, and there are 7, including Bulgaria, Romania, and a few others, that are not members of the Euro area. And currently in Bulgaria, there is a lot of fear, especially of all these people, rural areas, that once Bulgaria enter in the Euro area, there will be a very high inflation. And there are a lot of Eurosceptics, nationalistic parties that use that kind of fear of inflation, losing, and what they say, oh look, inflation is an important issue, but also there will be loss of sovereignty, loss of identity, because we don't have Bulgarian left, and Bulgarian left is a national pride. Proud. And you know, I mean, nobody speaks that Germany and France also decided to leave it and to have a common currency, single currency, and they just put on that very high on the current Bulgarian social, political, Facebook agenda. So that's quite an interesting topic that we can explore even in another seminar.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matthias. I could share that in Spain, there's this legend that prices rose with the euro, but when you see the statistics, the inflation was 10% before the euro, and then it's 1% or 2%. Nevertheless, if you enter in the euro, you renounce your monetary policy. But Bulgaria does not have a monetary policy since the 2001, because it's in a currency board, so it's not the same. David has a question. David,
Yeah, just give me a moment. I was trying to unmute. Yes. Well, my question was related to what my colleague asked first. That I understand that even though there are different countries, I wanted to ask if the local population of this zone saw the entrance to the UE with the same way, like they were expecting the same after entering the UE or not, because maybe we tend to associate that as they were on the other side of the Iron Curtain, they thought all like the same, and maybe they have different expectations about entering into the UE. And about that specifically, I wanted to know from the UE perspective how those expectations were handled. Like, the UE was aware of what that population was waiting for after the entrance. And also I want to know if those expectations were only based on the economic things, or the local population was waiting something else.
Okay, Kaloyan, if you want, I can start, but I also think it would be also a good idea also to give also perhaps the floor to Elena or to Lubomira, but I'll be brief. So first of all, about the expectations, it differs too much from the side if we speak about Eastern Europe or if we speak about Western Balkans. So in Eastern Europe, there was quite a homogeneous perception almost in all candidate countries at that time: Hungary, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, Czech Republic, Baltic states. There was a clear majority, roughly this is between 70 to 80%, strongly in favor of EU accession. For example, in Bulgaria, when there was the ratification of the accession treaty, there was only one vote out of 240. There was at that time only one vote against. Only one vote in the parliament. Of course, in the society is different, but still a great majority. So now in Western Balkans, the situation is quite different. For example, countries like Albania, they're much more in favor. They're much more consolidated towards EU accession. And even if you look at North Macedonia, that's quite an interesting issue. A neighboring country that Bulgaria has a very, very specific and interesting relations. Especially in the last years. Also before, of course. So there, the 25 or 40% of the population, they are native, so Albanians, and they're much pro, and those that are Macedonians, they are a little bit more puzzled, including because of the relations between Bulgaria and Macedonia, but not only. So it differs too much, the situation, if we speak about Eastern enlargement or Balkan countries. And about the perception afterwards, the Lubomira, what she mentioned, and she studied what happens if the country is not enough ready. I think currently in Europe, we have quite interesting cases, including the current country that shared the EU presidency, Hungary. Hungary was really the front runner. Hungary was the best example 15 years ago. And now you see from 10 or 11 years, he has the same prime minister, which is not a problem in itself. But for example, he expelled one university, and there was also some other developments in Hungary that, at least at my point of view, are not very positive. And so going back again to the euro and to the issue and to the European integration, again, this is so the transformation in the country is very interesting. I speak in Bulgaria. Bulgaria is still somebody considered as the most less developed country in the European Union. But now I make a research: where is Bulgaria in global classification, global indexes, including for, let's say, 180 countries. And even if I'm not wrong, Elena can correct me, of course, I think that now Bulgaria just recently entered in the group of the most developed country globally. So, I mean, for Bulgaria, this is a huge transformation I can share with you.
I can add also, if Lubomira is that's perfectly correct what Kaloyan mentioned. I think I recall, though, that a change in perceptions once you enter the EU, I think there's a lot of disillusionment as well, because countries somehow expected that a lot of their troubles will somehow, I don't know, go away, be resolved, be dealt with, but the work continues and reforms have to continue, and you need to keep developing, while countries thought that, okay, we're now in the EU and everything will be fixed. And it wasn't overnight. I think in the case of Bulgaria, but also others, it is clear that development continued. And as Kaloyan mentioned, this year, Bulgaria entered the high income category of countries. This is unheard of. This is from a country that was bankrupt several times and starting from the lowest base. So development continues, but at not an incredibly fast speed, while people, I think the ordinary people thought, where is this development? We're now in the EU, but still my pavement or my sidewalk is not fixed. I still have issues. The hospital is not giving me good care. These issues persist, and people see them, and a lot of them blame the EU. And I think also part of that maybe had some influence on a lot of the anti-EU sentiments, and maybe even on Brexit. I think we have maybe failed to communicate properly the benefits of the EU, and maybe people are focusing on the slow pace of development or slower than they wish, but things don't happen as a miracle. It takes generations to change and to achieve what, for example, Uruguay has achieved, and now Bulgaria is trying to achieve it. It's very difficult, but people, some of them don't appreciate it. We European Union fanatics here, I see I'm among the same people feel, I guess, strongly about this.
Thank you, Elena. Lumira, okay.
Just to add something very quickly, first I want to thank both Elena and Kaloyan for the 100% positive perspective, because that's really important and it's very inspiring actually to hear all these things. Just to add on something about the disillusionment, because this was 100% true. I have proved it through the investigation which I made actually. We see that the expectation of Bulgaria towards the membership back then, the knowledge of what the EU is was so low, and then the expectation of the membership was exactly a miracle. I would just quote a few things that I remember. It was like we were building a church. Joining the European Union was like building a church, entering the other world, breaking up with the past. So we had this really huge, on the one hand, expectations, but very abstract and very unclear, very value-laden. So it is kind of expected that when you end up with the reality, which is more concrete, specific, instrumental, and not a miracle, as Elena said, this will open space for some negative sentiments. But we have to be careful with that, absolutely. And then about the Hungary case, absolutely what Kaloyan said is true. And I think it's a very interesting example how being a front runner in the process based on the accession criteria and based on the way the process was handled is absolutely different from really building a political culture and a society which can develop effectively 100% within the EU institutions and live up to the EU values.
Thank you, Lubomira. Are there any other questions? I had another question, but I think we're finishing very well with that topic. I don't want to change the course, and so I will probably. We can finish here, right, Virginia? No. Thank you very much to the three expert, three participants. I think it was really interesting, and I will invite the students or also the participants in the afternoon session, which will focus on. It's more about the Balkans, because we'll focus on the conflict, the historical origin of conflict between Serbia and Kosovo. Then Bulgaria and Macedonia, as Kaloyan told, he mentioned that recently Bulgaria and Macedonia have some problems, and then, well, I think he imagined that it's not recently, it's old story. So we'll focus on Bulgaria and Macedonia and Kosovo and Serbia, and also we will go to the 19th century to see what's the origin of these problems and the intervention of foreign powers. What was the role of intervention of foreign powers, and what is actually happening there? Because we didn't mention it, but Bulgaria is somehow blocking the accession of Macedonia. Macedonia changed their name, but we will talk this in the second session. One of the participants was here, but we'll talk with him later. So thank you very much, everyone. I think it was really, really interesting.
Thank you. See you in the afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you also from our side, and wish all the good luck to your university and of course to Uruguay. It was really a pleasure for us speaking with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks from me too. All the best, everyone, and reach out if you'd like. And nice to meet the Bulgarian participants too.